You know, they say if you really want to understand a person, you should take a look at their bookshelf. But what if that bookshelf belonged to someone who literally built an entire nation? We're going to dive into the private library of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Turkish Republic, to try and uncover the intellectual blueprint he used to build a new nation right from the ashes of an empire. First, let's just get a sense of the scale here. We're not talking about some small, casual collection. Over his lifetime, Atatürk read and made notes in a staggering 3,997 books. And this wasn't just for show, you know? This was his workshop. It was an arsenal of ideas. And this just proves he wasn't some passive collector. No, he was an active, engaged reader. This dedication in his own handwriting is just one little example. I mean, he was underlining passages, scribbling notes in the margins, basically arguing with his sources. This library was a living, breathing part of his whole revolutionary project. Okay, so here's the journey we're about to take through his library. First, we'll look at his search for Turkey's ancient roots. Then, we're going to take a pretty surprising detour into the mythical lost continent of Mu. After that, we'll see his vision for the perfect modern citizen, and then finally, we'll tie all these threads together to really get into the mind of this nation builder. A huge part of creating a new nation is that you have to give it a new story, right? For Atatürk, that meant cutting ties with the whole Ottoman past and finding a deeper, way more ancient identity for the Turkish people. One that was rooted in Central Asia and even beyond. And language was absolutely central to this. His library is just packed with dictionaries and linguistic studies, like this one on the Yakut language, which is a Turkic language spoken way up in Siberia. This was all part of a massive, state-sponsored project to purify the Turkish language of all its Arabic and Persian influences and create a brand new, modern language for brand new, modern people. But his search went even further back in time. He got completely fascinated with ancient civilizations like the Sumerians, always looking for connections, for any little thread that might link the Turkish people to the very dawn of civilization. And notice how he's reading. He isn't just passively soaking up information. His own markings show him zeroing in on a very specific passage, actively interrogating the text, looking for any little piece of evidence that might fit his theory. And this is the line he marked, a physical description of the Sumerians as a people with black hair. Now, that might seem like a really small detail, but for Atatürk, it was a potential clue, another piece of the giant puzzle he was putting together to construct a whole new history for his nation. So we've seen the academic and the historical research, but his quest for origins also took him to some, well, let's just say, some very unconventional places. And this is where we see an entirely different side of his thinking. Just look at this contrast. It's pretty wild. On the left, you've got this dense academic text on Sumerian geography. On the right, a mystical seven-headed serpent. Both of these images come from books that Atatürk was reading and making notes in. And that second image? It's from a book about a mythical lost world. So Atatürk became deeply interested in this theory of the lost continent of Mu. It was a popular fringe theory at the time, proposing this huge, ancient civilization in the Pacific that was supposedly the ancestor of all humanity, including ancient Egyptians, Mayans, and maybe, in Atatürk's view, the Turks. And here again, we can literally see his mind at work. In this book about Mu, right next to a passage describing the destruction of Mayan cities in the Yucatan, he writes a single word in the margin, Yakut. He's trying to connect everything, the myth of Mu, the ancient Mayans, and the Yakut people of Siberia, into one single, grand unified theory of Turkish origins. This raises a pretty fascinating question, doesn't it? Why would a leader so focused on science and modernity spend any time on what we would now just call pseudoscience? Well, maybe it's because building a nation isn't just about facts. It's about creating a powerful, compelling story, an epic origin myth that really inspires national pride. But Atatürk's vision wasn't just focused on some mythical past. His library shows he was equally obsessed with designing the future. He wasn't just building a state. He was trying to build a whole new type of citizen. So right alongside the ancient history and lost continents, you find books like this one, a technical manual on massage and physical therapy. This shows a really deep concern for the physical well-being of the population. A strong nation, in his view, had to be a healthy nation. And then you've got this book, My System, which promotes a 15-minute daily exercise routine. For Atatürk, patriotism and national identity were physical things. The ideal modern citizen wasn't just educated, but also disciplined, healthy, and physically strong. Ultimately, though, everything was built on one single foundation: science. This book, The New Path of Science, personally dedicated to him, shows you exactly where his true faith was. The ideal citizen had to be rational, secular, and guided by scientific principles, above all else. So how do we put all these different pieces together? You've got the ancient history, the wild myths, the exercise manuals, the science textbooks. How does it all add up? Well, it's time to connect the threads. It all forms a pretty clear three-part strategy. First, he used history and language to create a deep pre-Islamic past for the Turkish nation. Second, he was not afraid to explore even myth and esoteric theories to build up a sense of epic grandeur and pride. And third, he laid out a very practical blueprint for the new citizen, physically fit and mentally guided by science and reason. So in the end, Atatürk's library wasn't just a place for learning. It was an active workshop. It was the intellectual laboratory where he was mixing history, myth, and science all together to forge the very soul of a new nation. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought. If one man's library could serve as the blueprint for an entire nation's identity, it really makes you wonder, what do the books and ideas our leaders are consuming today reveal about the future they're trying to build for all